Welcome to Eiyuden Chronicle's minimal spoiler review, you outdated bastards. Review key was provided by the publisher through Lurkit. If you're interested in the game, check out the link in the description. Alright, let's get started. For the sake of transparency, so that you know where your money is going, you should know that Sweet Baby was involved in the project. Due to how wacky the fantasy setting is in Eastern culture, their propaganda doesn't hurt the game that much, but certain political agendas can be noticed quite easily. For me personally, it didn't ruin anything, just made me roll my eyes a couple of times upon noticing certain patterns. Nothing drastic though. Played for about 90 hours on PlayStation 5 and had beaten the game on hard difficulty with extra modifiers on, which are double SP/MP costs and no item usage during combat. Also remember that liking or hating the game doesn't mean that it's good or bad. Fun, hate, love, like, dislike are all subjective concepts that pertain to you as the individual. You can like bad games and find no fun in great games. Not many people know this, but I have two weaknesses or vulnerabilities when it comes to gaming. Certain things that always make me enjoy the game more, and RPG genre plays right into both, especially Eiyuden Chronicles. One is leveling up. I love meaningful things happening in games, and leveling up is a meaningful common denominator in all RPGs, be it Western or Eastern style. I love when in Dungeons & Dragons RPGs I have to make big choices every level up, because it means that something meaningful is happening. In JRPGs they adopt a different mechanic, which is many more level ups with all stats increasing across the board, next to unique systems in place to customize characters. When it comes to character leveling customization, JRPGs are usually much weaker in terms of options than Western RPGs, but they grant many more level ups to give that satisfying feeling of progress through increase in power. Simple, effective and addictive. My second weakness is having crazy diversity when it comes to party members. Cool fantasy races and creatures with unique movesets and overall character diversity that grants me so many strategic options. Eiyuden has 120 recruits, which is insane, but not all are combat ready, so the actual number is much lower. Still rather impressive. I've been saying for such a long time now that Western RPGs are not utilizing fantasy races to the extent they should be doing it. There are so many cool options, but they always go for lamest and most used ones. Granted, there are exceptions, like Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, that went to the next level in terms of crazy cool and fun races, creatures and classes. Giving us options such as to play as Dragon, Lich, Angel, Devil was truly spectacular. Well, I'm glad to announce that the best thing about the Eiyuden is the roster itself. Crazy diverse aesthetically, but unfortunately not distinctive enough in terms of gameplay. Elves, dwarves, quirky anime characters, dragons, griffins, undead, bazooka-wielding characters, samurai, ninjas, and so on. There is something for everyone here, I'd say, even though some character designs pissed me off. Lycan with sword and shield. Why? Instead of using his claws and strength, he's using weapons. Pointless. Or dragon and griffin size in the party. Way too small. Especially annoying when fighting rabbits that are half the size of the dragon. Brain dead design. Aesthetically, aside from size issues, sprites look great. As you can see, Eiyuden does play to my weaknesses, but I'll put those aside and be realistic as much as I can be. Unfortunately, I can tell you immediately that if what I've said about the roster doesn't sell you the game, nothing else will, because frankly the game outside of roster diversity has absolutely no good or great aspects. Everything is so basic, outdated, lacking, but there is something about it that is going to push you forward despite being aware that they messed the game up. It's a very chill experience that has almost no ability to excite, but it's also far from a bad game. I've played Suikoden 2 when I was a kid, so I don't recall much except that it kicked my arse, which is to be expected because it isn't easy to understand complexities of RPGs as a young bastard. Eiyuden, though, aside from a few boss fights and trials, was a bit on the easier side, even with extra difficulty settings, which disappointed me. I was looking forward to a huge challenge considering the connection with Suikoden. Big problem of the game that ties into the difficulty problems is the unpolished combat system. There is depth to combat design, but it plays out too basic to call it strategic. Simply pay attention to turn order, use normal attacks with occasional water whale, defend and heal. That's the extent of what you're gonna do. Not because there is nothing else to do, but because everything else for the most part sucks. Spells are terribly ineffective, and hero combos, a feature that should have been some kind of an epic element, are in most cases a waste of an attack. To reduce strategic elements of such a game with huge combat potential due to sheer number of party combinations to basic attacks and turn order attention is embarrassingly bad balancing. Big issue is also the fact that outside of a few attribute differences and occasional unique lance attacks, most heroes in their respective categories are way too similar. Not aesthetically, but mechanically. It's all an issue coming from an unpolished system, because there is depth to it if you start to dig deeper, but it's rarely utilized to a degree it should have been. Unlike mechanical differences, I have to commend the game for making the personalities of all these heroes unique. That is tough to do, but they have succeeded. Personalities are not deep, but they don't have to be with such a huge roster. Just making their personalities unique enough to be distinctive is a big thing, and definitely one of the positives of the game. Now to talk a bit more about combat. Physical attacks are divided into 5 types: blunt, slash, thrust, grapple and throw. Blunt can remove armor, grapple goes through armor, and throw does more damage against flying enemies. That is a well thought out system, but it rarely shines. In the end you end up with whatever heroes you want to have, and it's gonna work out without the need to plan the party composition. Same goes for elemental attacks. No status effects like burning and frozen that would add another strategic layer. Aside from missing element based statuses, overall status effects are underutilized from enemies. Players can create parties focused on certain status effects, and most of the time it is going to be around stun, as it is very useful and easy to build around. There are also confusion, blind, petrify, and probably more that I forgot about. You know, for example, in Final Fantasy games when fighting Malboro how difficult it is due to status effects? Well, the only fights in Eiyuden where status effects play a huge part are when enemies use Reaper's Lullaby and AoE sleep. Then that sleep sometimes is cancelled by I honestly don't know what. Sometimes I was receiving damage without waking up, but on the other occasion I did wake up upon getting hit. As you can see, Eiyuden's problem is not the combat design, but implementation of it all. Completely out of balance and unpolished. Usually in JRPGs you are building towards epic moves through normal attacks and using magic sporadically to maximize DPS, which is an important dynamic to a turn-based system to create more excitement. But Eiyuden is almost completely devoid of special moves' usefulness. Enemy variety also isn't the greatest for such a long game, but it's not bad either. Question is if they will balance the game out in future, but honestly I don't think they will, because it would require a lot of work, as the whole system would need rebalancing from scratch. It would improve the game significantly though if they succeeded at it. Progressing through locations is done in more of a dungeon-like style, but with corridor-based layout. There are no open areas except for walking on the world map, which I don't like, but there are gimmicks to almost every dungeon, which is nice. For example, in Proving Grounds the whole area can be rotated, that opens up new paths and rewards. In Greatwood there are plans that launch players to other parts of the area. It is great that they decided to add such gimmicks, because if it was just corridor after corridor without anything else like in Final Fantasy XIII, it would end up as an uninteresting bore fest. Locations aesthetically look alright, but nothing outstanding except Undead Castle and maybe one more location. They serve the purpose basically, with some locations being more interesting than others, but for the most part it is pretty basic. Gimmicks help though to uplift the experience in places where they are present. Eiyuden added item management as part of the progression, meaning you can't have million healing potions in the inventory to replenish health and MP whenever, but a limited amount instead. So the point is to get through these fights as efficiently as possible, so that when the boss pops up the party is still capable of dealing with it. It's not a bad design at all to limit consumables, but it's screwed up a lot by not introducing separate tabs for picked up equipment and runes. They all count towards the item limit, which leads to frustrating inventory management. Especially considering how many heroes there are and how the game forces more teams than one sometimes, or switches to science story, and you are left with under-equipped party members that can't be brought up to par because of the inventory limitations that prevented bringing enough equipment options. Leads to a lot of annoyance when leveling other party members as well, especially considering how bad the storage has been done. Can't even sort items by type, which is the only relevant sorting. Inventory and storage UI is a mess, and it just increases annoyance. Trials at the end of the game are something else though, quite challenging, and it is where I've had most fun probably. It works as some sort of wave-based survival mode with added heroes between floors that you have to use. So mix and match, but the whole roster needs to be well prepared, otherwise you won't get far. Bosses are alright, unbalanced, but I do have specialties and gimmicks that on extra hard difficulty need special attention. For example, Ancient Seed retaliates every time upon getting hit with normal attack. so only the most powerful attacks should be used when available next to spells. Nertus burrows and the player needs to predict whether it is going to come up on left or right side to use the correct gimmick. Gimmicks do make the fights more interesting. Again, they could have done more with the bosses, especially when it comes to balancing, but they are a positive, no doubt. Leveling progression is quite basic. Add or change runes to add more attribute bonuses, special attacks and magic type. Attributes automatically level up, which is typical for JRPGs. Each character has a unique attribute distribution, but most in their respective roles have it very similar. For all characters, main differences are between defense versus evasion oriented attributes and hard damage versus hard defense. What I like is that even though attributes go into hundreds, small changes are felt. Whole character progression system is quite basic, but it works. Can't really commend it, because they could have done much more and can't slight it too much for what it is. What pisses me off so much is when the game doesn't explain what each attribute does, but you have to guess and exact answers can't be found out for a couple attributes. What kind of a dickhead makes that type of a decision not to explain attributes in RPG? If that was a conscious decision, fire that person immediately. Let's move on to the story. General story following the war is quite good, I'd say. It is predictable for the most part, but it does create a meaningful situation through war atrocities and backstabbing tactics. Story takes us through the whole continent in pursuit of alliances, likely and unlikely. It is all very diverse, as each region has its own structure with lots of influences coming from advisors and generals. They need to decide whether to join the League of Nations led by us, or the much more powerful Imperial Army, which creates interesting conflicts inside the power structure of each kingdom. I enjoyed meeting all these different nations, as they are full of various characters and personalities, especially Shark Nation. They are fun as hell. There isn't almost any lore, unfortunately, that would deepen the meaning of it all, but alright.
You must be the new guy Emir mentioned. Welcome to the Watch.
Problems come outside of the general story, mainly the dialogue. While the game succeeds in creating humorous situations frequently and makes me laugh more than a couple of times, it fails miserably in creating any sort of meaningful interactions. It's been a while since I've seen dialogue this bad. Childish, cringy, awkward, and a lot of it is just filler. They talk about a point of interest, for example the upcoming battle against Imperials, and then follow it up with every single character doing some bullshit pep talk. Pep talk like, yes, we can do it. Our hearts are strong, we have justice on our side, and similar first grade elementary school level writing. Part of it could be due to bad localization, but I've had plenty of experience with JRPGs in my life to know that in most dialogue sucks, so it definitely isn't just localization. It creates this terrible dynamic where the general story is very mature, political, serious, but then childish, terrible filler dialogue prevents players from being invested into it more. Just doesn't work. Every time the general story started to interest me more and more, dialogue that ensued took me out immediately. Completely different tone that doesn't suit the story at all. Adding humorous situations is a positive, and I love it as they are sporadically placed, as they should be, to surprise the player with something unexpected and to change the dynamic for a brief moment. But the added filler dialogue is so damn bad it takes away from both the story and the humor. Made me angry at how bad it is. Main antagonist, from what I recall, is the only one with a constant serious tone that makes sense in this whole story and good enough dialogue that you want to pay attention to. Decent antagonist overall. His subordinates have unique personalities and react to things their own way, which adds another layer of interest to baddies. JRPGs are famous for having minigames, and Eiyuden is no different. There's a bunch of them. Battlefield or War minigame is part of the story progression, and it is simple strategically with almost no chance to lose. Idea of putting a war minigame in a game with a story about warring nations is a great one, to change the dynamic of the game occasionally in a way that it makes sense. But execution is again too basic. I like the idea, but they should have done so much more with it. Then we have HQ and its minigames. I haven't talked about HQ yet, but next to recruiting heroes, the point of the game is to upgrade your castle in all ways possible. By upgrading it, shops pop up, potential recruits visit the castle, minigames are unlocked, and aesthetically starts to look more like a proper city after a bunch of upgrades. I actually like the HQ and think it is a good idea because, as said earlier, because of the story, it makes sense and adds meaningful things to the game. So working towards HQ upgrades is fruitful, and we don't have to grind a lot to upgrade everything, especially later on. Mission Guild sends heroes to complete missions that grant resources as a reward. Overall design of HQ and its upgrades is mechanically good, even though the UI is again terrible. Minigames overall are positive, but not all. Egg racing is fantastic, one of my favorite minigames in a long time. Watching eggs on legs race with a bunch of obstacles while winning never being guaranteed was very enjoyable.
Sunny side up today. What's this? Number 4 coming up from behind. Number 1 pulling away now. Number 5 looking to take the lead. Number 3 narrowing the gap now.
Card game is also great. Opening packs, forming decks, mix of poker and Magic the Gathering is quite a nice combination. I don't play card games, so no clue if this was copied from somewhere else, but it is a good addition.
My turn.
Beigoma, or however you say that, on the other hand, is something I didn't like at all. It's confusing, gives very little engagement, and button mashing drives me up the wall. Button mashing in 2024? What? I understand 30 years ago when everything was a new idea, but button mashing should not exist in 2024. To make matters worse, to get all the recruits we have to spend many hours playing this weak minigame. Then there are races with Shark Nation which are terrible, hard to control, time limit based, nothing interesting. Let's talk a bit about the video and audio part of the game. I love the art style. Characters look distinctive enough and the tech animations look great. Locations look the part, but nothing extraordinary. Problem I've had on PlayStation 5 is the shadowing glare, I think that's it, and texture popping. That is especially present on the world map. Basically there is like a line that is quite visible, where on one side of it are very few details, while on the other side more details can be seen. Affects the visual portion of the world map a lot. Framerate was stable for the most part, but in some parts it was stuttering and slowing down. Visual effects during combat are weak, especially when it comes to spell attacks. Makes already weak spells seem even weaker. Audio work is disappointing. I've tried playing with voices, Japanese and English, for some time, but quickly turned them all off. They are not bad, especially English. Not great, but not bad. Problem is voice repetitiveness during combat, tends to annoy quickly. Also, does Japan have 5 voice actors in total? Almost every Japanese game has 5 voiceovers and that is it. Cool type character, shy schoolgirl, screeching child, angry shouting dude present in absolutely every JRPG ever, and calm, half depressed, don't care about anything person. Granted, I don't watch anime, but that little bit of experience I had with it and a lot of experience with JRPGs have way too few voiceover personalities. I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong. Feel free to disregard what I've said, just something I've noticed that is most likely wrong. Next to annoying combat voices, sound effects during combat are quite bad. Nothing gives that satisfying feeling of hitting an enemy properly. Music is alright, could use more tunes that change more frequently, but it's alright. Eiyuden Chronicles has a very outdated and non-friendly UI, while also lacking many quality of life features. For example, can't skip cutscenes, so if you decide to load the last save instead of rematching the boss, you have to sit through the same conversations over and over. Upgrading weapons at blacksmith is some of the most blatant time wasting I have ever seen. Imagine having to do this for every hero. I swear, some of the designs of this game made me rage so much. Developers stuck with heads up their asses. Overall, equipping the whole roster with armor and accessories due to inventory limitations becomes a chore. There are so many little things that are missing that could improve the game bit by bit. Whole studio is stuck in the 90s, and not in a good way. Like they decided to use the worst stuff from those years to make the game more nostalgic. Honestly, considering the games I've played lately and how many bad design decisions there are, it worries me that a lot of the devs have completely lost the plot with even the smallest things that would be so easy to make better. Eiyuden Chronicles is a game. That's all you can say about it, really. It does almost nothing great, and it also does very few things bad. It's just there. Chill experience that is basic, outdated, addictive and nostalgic in good and bad ways. Has nothing in it to excite, but also rarely disappoints. I do think if they sort out the UI and do a massive balance overhaul, it could be a good game, so I'll give it potential of 7, but as things stand, it is a 5. Definition of mediocrity. Anyway, that's all. See you soon.